Okay, hello. My name is Rhian Williams, and I'm here with Kirstie Blair, and we are doing one of our poetry podcasts. This is a little project that we've set up, and if you want to hear a bit more about it, what we're going to do and how it pans out, then please do go and have a look at our blog, which is called poetrypodcasts.wordpress.com. So that's WordPress, WordPress.com. But today we are going to be talking about Tennyson's poem Mariana. So Mariana then was published in Tennyson's first volume of poems, which came out in 1830. So, Kirstie, do you want to say a bit about the beginning?
We're assuming that if you're listening to this podcast, you should have already read the poem. If you haven't, stop now. Quickly read through the text, which is available on our blog and many other places. And if you've read Mariana, you'll know that this is a poem in which nothing happens. It's a poem about a woman waiting for someone to arrive who never arrives. Most of the poem is a description of her situation and her location. So it's an extremely famous poem, and it's interesting that it's famous despite being a poem in which literally nothing happens. The point of the poem is that nothing happens, and that at the end Mariana is in exactly the same situation that she was in at the start. And usually I think when we read a poem, especially a narrative poem, we expect there to be a narrative. Mm-hmm. We expect there to be progress. Yeah. We expect something to happen. Even if, say in a poem like The Solitary Reaper, what might happen is the poet himself comes to a new understanding, or seemingly a new understanding about something or other. But how do you write a poem with such a lack of event?
Exactly.
How do you write a poem about nothing? And how does that poem then become not only one of the most famous Tennysonian poems, but one of the most famous Victorian poems, endlessly repeated and recycled and reread?
Absolutely. So this is what we're interested in really today, is to think about how Tennyson manages to create something lasting, beautiful, important, significant, out of very little, frankly, where nothing, as Kirstie says, has happened. So what we want to do is to think about how that nothingness becomes something, and that something we might find at the level of form in the poem as well as content. So we know that nothing happens in terms of the story, but we're interested in how Tennyson uses his poetic techniques of rhyme and control and rhythm and so on to create an effect of nothingness that is still ongoing and lasting. So maybe we'll sort of think then a little bit about, okay, so this is a poem that's named for Mariana, and indeed this is something Tennyson did quite often, and especially in his early lyrics, is to name poems after women.
Yeah, he has a whole sequence in this same volume, doesn't he? Mm-hmm. All generally descriptions of particular women. And
yeah, exactly. So one area then we might think about is the relationship with gender that he's establishing here, and between this male poet voice and the females that he evokes. The other thing that we have before we begin to help us along a bit is this quotation then from Measure for Measure, Mariana in the Moated Grange. So moated grange then, obviously if something has a moat around it, it suggests it's trapped and still and something enclosed. Also,
if you've read Measure for Measure, my recollection is that Mariana is a deserted lover of Angelo, and that in the somewhat dubious plot resolution at the end of Measure for Measure, she's neatly married off to him through a bed trick.
Oh right, yes, yeah, exactly. So, but she's sort of off stage.
She's off stage. We never see her.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that she even really speaks, or certainly she's not a significant female character within the play.
No, exactly. So she's a sort of anomaly in the play, and yet this is this sort of side person from Shakespeare's play is somebody that's caught Tennyson's attention.
But from that quotation, I think we get a sense of passivity, and like you were saying, of already being trapped.
Exactly. There's also a sense, if it's a moat, that implies a castle or a tower, so I guess that does also suggest something of a kind of mythic or fairy tale setting.
Yeah, or sort of medievalist.
Exactly.
I mean, Tennyson's very medievalist in his early poems, like The Lady of Shalott, and Mariana as well is a kind of old-fashioned name.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. It's also a very lyrical name, actually, Mariana, with several syllables up and down.
So if we just look at the form of the poem for a minute, what it looks like on the page.
Indeed. We can see then that it's in stanzas. Those stanzas are regular, wide, longer lines narrowing to a shorter line in each one.
And the most obvious feature is the refrain.
Yes.
The song-like refrain at the end of each stanza, which, as you can see, even just by looking at it without reading it, is almost the same every time it recurs.
Exactly. So refrains are one line or a couple of lines at the end of each stanza that comes back and again and again and again. So refrains then are something that's used in songs, as I'm sure you'd be aware of. And so they suggest something progressive, moving on from verse to verse, but there's also something stagnant about them, recurring. They keep coming back to the same phrasing. So we have that then. In terms of, if we just look at the first stanza, we can start to unpick the way in which Tennyson is creating this space of stagnation then. If we just go through the first few lines, with blackest moss the flower plots were thickly crusted one and all, the rusted nails fell from the knots that held the pair to the gable wall. So already it's starting with these alternate rhymes.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of internal rhyme as well.
Yes, and Tennyson is famous for his use of assonance, consonants for the sound effects that he can create in poetry. So the blackest, the black and the thick and the crusted are all speaking to each other, and the T at the end of plots.
Exactly.
As well.
We have
moss picks up on plots.
Plots, exactly.
Picks up on one to a certain extent. Thickly, blackest, crusted. Not quite. The past tense is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Where crusted, the rusted nails fell from the knots.
Exactly.
So these are all things that have...
It's like an aftermath.
Almost already happened. Yes.
Exactly. So this space has become thickly crusted and the nails have rusted and fallen. Mm-hmm. This pear has fallen as well. It's a sort of sense that these things have gone and are no longer there.
So this is a description of what seems like a garden in a state of decay. And I think that plots and knots, highlighted by the rhyme, are interesting and significant words here, because both of those imply something that's been ordered and organised. A flower plot is a plot partly because you plan it out, don't you? You kind of you build it and create it.
Exactly.
Knots holding the pair to the wall, again, perhaps a sense of restraint or something being neatly tied up. So now the flower pots have become encrusted, like maybe you can't even see the edges, you can't see where they are, there are no flowers growing in them. There's no pears on the wall because the kind of framework has fallen. So in the one sense you're getting a sense of something ordered and organised that's fallen into decay.
Yes.
And I wonder whether we could extrapolate from this to be thinking about the poem as a poem that has no plot.
Right, yes, and it's come into a knot.
Well, Mariana is effectively kind of tied up or trapped.
Yes.
And actually she's trapped within a plot, because we know this is the Mariana from Measure from Measure.
Yeah, so absolutely.
If she is that Mariana, then her fate is already decided.
Exactly.
Before the poem even gets going.
That's true, absolutely. So she's an already happened, has happened to her.
She's in the past tense.
Exactly.
By being that. But also it's a sense of plots that are falling apart, because actually the poem doesn't have a plot.
Yeah.
If there was a plot that Mariana should have been in, which in Shakespeare I think does involve her getting married, that plot's not happening in this poem.
Exactly.
This poem is about how that plot's become kind of encrusted with stagnation and things going wrong.
Absolutely, and knotted. It's become knotty.
Yes.
Exactly. So he's I think he's also implying then, when you have these flower plots and plotting implying both a story but also a laying out of space and a kind of control of the space, we can then see that in the control of the space of the poem as well.
Yes, exactly.
This is part of the plotting going on here, is Tennyson's plotting out of a spot of land in which Mariana is trapped.
And doing so in the shape of these very carefully constructed and controlled stanzas.
Absolutely. And so it's something that's very appealing to the ear, because we have a really strong sense of onomatopoeia. The sound is also describing the thing. There's a sense that we can hear the crusting. As it's sort of building up across line by line, very thick with sound and imagery.
Crusted, yes, exactly. One and all, the rusted nails, another internal rhyme.
Exactly.
The broken sheds looked sad and strange. Unlifted was the clinking latch, weeded and worn the ancient thatch upon the lonely moated grange. Those lines, the broken sheds looked sad and strange, unlifted was the clinking latch, make me think, where are we in this poem? Where is the poet? The broken sheds looked almost as though the sheds themselves might be kind of looking, they looked sad.
Yes, exactly.
We're looking at them. But also, unlifted was the clinking latch. Who's hearing the latch clinking? Because this is a poem about isolation and Mariana being alone. But are we, as the readers, somehow in the space of the poem to hear and to see these things? Or is this an effect where we're looking through Mariana's eyes and she is thinking those sheds look sad?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is one of the interesting things that Tennyson is doing with lyric then, because lyric suggests something expressive, and yet this is very internal and, hermetic. She's kind of enclosed, and yet we're obviously part of this. I think as well with the unlifted was the clinking latch. Unlifted then, so that latch is being described precisely because nothing has happened to it. It wasn't lifted up. And yet the clinking... you can hear the clink again. That's another onomatopoeic word. It's clinking in the poem.
When you hear a latch clinking, it's because someone is opening the gate. But here, even though it's making that noise, it's no one's there. No human hand is lifting it. So it's like the idea of a gate kind of swinging to and fro.
Exactly.
Empty, which again suggests things kind of breaking down.
It does, and also that things are passive, that latch is not being lifted, it's just clinking.
And isn't that highlighted by, would you say unlifted? So the broken sheds look sad and strange, the rust, dead nails fell from the knots. The knots, that doesn't quite... But, these are regular 4-beat lines.
Yes.
But unlifted, is that unlifted or is it unlifted?
Yes.
Do you see what I mean? Do you emphasise the because that's the...
Exactly.
important part of the line, so that word stands out.
Yeah, you're right. Unlifted was the clinking latch, but unlifted is actually a lifting sound.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so, very nice. Yes.
But there's something very strange about his construction there, because also unlifted is a word that he's made up. But really, it's not the usual way that we describe something as having not been lifted. So we can see then that what he's doing then is creating a sense of passivity and negativity and past tense, which is also something that dictates then the rhythms as well.
But past tense that works oddly with the clinking, which is the only word that is in effect an ongoing action, isn't it? Not fell and held or unlifted, but that the latch is continuously clinking.
Yes, that's true, exactly, in that sort of, ongoingness. And it's interesting that here then what we've seen up to now is alternate rhymes, A B C D, but instead of going C D again, it's gone D C. So there's trapped in the middle there is the latch and thatch, which is a couplet, where elsewhere it was alternate rhymes.
So you could say that it was shut in.
Yeah, exactly. It's closed in itself. It's an entrapped couplet in the centre, in the same way that Mariana is entrapped in the poem.
So it turns back on itself.
Exactly.
In lines 4, 5 to 8.
Yeah, exactly. So then you have a sort of like an eye of a storm. It comes to that couplet and then it moves out again each time, because then the rest of that stanza goes. So the D in the middle and then C E F E F, which then picks up the refrain. So weeded and worn, again that alliteration there, the ancient thatch.
And ancient again looks back to moated grange, and forward to it in the next line as well, with a suggestion of something old and decaying, but also something kind of medieval or a castle.
Absolutely.
A kind of...
And something kind of superannuated. There's a sense in which this is sort of out of the rush of life, something that's kind of lost its purpose, to a sense, both the place, the person, everything. And I wonder then how much, there's a sense in which poetry itself is sort of that past and evokes the past. It might be something which goes beyond our podcast now, but to think about how poetry was functioning in the 1830s as well, whether it feels like Mariana, trapped in the past, or whether it feels of the present. So, upon the lonely moated grange then, lonely is interesting in the way that we had sad for the sheds. The grange is now lonely. These are inanimate objects becoming emotional.
So obviously we might say that the emotion might actually be Mariana's emotion that's being transferred onto these buildings.
Yeah.
And that it's her loneliness, her sadness, her feeling that everything has become strange that's being reflected on in this well, I was going to say seemingly innocent, but it's not very innocent from the outset, is it?
But
in this description.
It also suggests that Mariana's
seemingly objective description, which is, of course, in no way an objective description of the scene.
It's a very
because every word is loaded deliberately with meaning and implication.
And also that means that Mariana's emotional state just can't help but colour everything for her. So she's somebody kind of trapped in this lyrical state of extreme emotion.
Yes.
And lyric being associated with extreme emotions as well. Then there's a sense in which it's become her mode, and there's nothing that escapes it.
Yeah. And it would be interesting to look at our other podcast on Porphyria's Lover and compare the lines here to the opening of that.
Exactly.
And we also talk a little bit more there about pathetic fallacy, the Victorian invention of the term pathetic fallacy and what it meant, which is precisely what we're saying.
Exactly.
Only being able to see the world subjectively.
Exactly. So that being and that being problematic as well as, celebrated in other places.
Yeah.
But then we have. I was just thinking of the lonely and only. Then.
Yes. And that lovely echo really makes the lonely relate strongly to Mariana. She only said, which is again an odd word. Why would you say she only said? Like that is the only thing she ever said, or her only response to this scene is,
or she simply said,
yeah.
Exactly. My life is dreary, he cometh not. She said. In fact, I've just noticed that's 3 saids in as many lines.
Yeah, when we would know that she's the person saying it without she only said, my life is dreary, he cometh not. I am a weary, I would that I were dead. I mean, you need the said to rhyme with dead, don't you?
Yeah, exactly. But even those little phrases then are trapped within she said.
So that's the only action that Mariana can take in the poem, is to repeatedly say something, but what she repeatedly says is the same thing.
Exactly, yeah. My life is dreary, he cometh not.
And she's not saying it to anyone inside the poem. So her speech is in no way related to action or creating action.
And in the same way that the Tennyson has done strange things with unlifted, he cometh not. It's not he's not coming.
Yes.
It ends with the not. So he cometh not. That inversion makes the weight then fall on the negativity.
Yeah, not. Yes.
He cometh not.
And cometh suggests something that's potentially ongoing again. Not. It's not as strong as he is coming. Not.
Oh, he's not coming. Yeah, exactly.
It implies that he could be coming, but that he's not coming.
Yeah, exactly. I am a weary, I would that I were dead. I would have it that I were dead. So her only expression of volition, her will, what she would will to happen, is that she was dead.
Is that nothing would happen ever again.
Exactly.
And that she would lose the only power she has, the power of speech.
Yeah.
Yes, and the other interesting thing here, of course, is the dreary and the weary, where if you look at the rhythm of those lines, she only said, my life is dreary, he cometh not, she said. So all the other lines in this stanza end with a stress for plots, the knots that gave a wall, strange, but dreary and weary fall off on the last syllables. There's actually an extra unstressed syllable at the end of those lines. And interestingly, when you have an extra unstressed syllable, the more old-fashioned way of referring to that is as a feminine ending.
Indeed, absolutely.
And this is Mariana wanting a feminine ending.
Yes, you're right, exactly.
Tennyson does very interesting things in these early poems with feminine endings and woman and death, which is a big topic throughout.
Absolutely.
Poems, chiefly lyrical.
So what we have here then is this strange setup wherein we have a male poet who is kind of occupying the space of a female speaker who doesn't speak, but then does speak, and then only in feminine fading lines.
And who's never... I mean, it's interesting that, the Victorians like to draw and paint Mariana, didn't they?
Yes,
I mean, we'll put the famous Millet Mariana on our blog, so...
And Waterhouse as well,
Did I mean Millet? I meant Waterhouse, didn't I? But
maybe
there's one or two, There's one or two Marianas.
Exactly.
But of course Mariana's never described here at all. It's only her voice, isn't it? I mean, she does her voice and her tears.
Yes, exactly.
We have no idea what she looks like.
No.
What age she is.
No, it's true, actually. Absolutely. So we just have this, has the space around her that's soaked in description.
So it's almost a voyeuristic poem about looking at an abandoned woman, and of course the Victorians loved to sympathise with abandoned women in many different
and
texts.
She focuses all
and paintings.
Exactly, the abandoned woman focuses all kinds of Victorian anxieties.
But oddly, she herself is pushed to the side, just as she's kind of pushed into the refrain here.
Exactly.
In the first stanza, we don't get to see her until we've had the description.
Yeah.
She's sidelined almost in a poem that should be about her, just as she's sidelined in the...
Absolutely. In the play.
In the plot.
Where she came from, exactly. So in fact, this isn't a solution. It's not like Tennyson said, OK, let's tell Mariana's story and make it a happy ending instead, or let's tell Mariana's story and make it a tragic one. Instead, all he does is take that little sideline from Shakespeare's play and revels in it, just stays still in that side.
And Tennyson loves to enjoy a moment, doesn't he? He loves to have a moment in which nothing is happening.
Exactly.
Or a moment before something happens, when something might happen, like he might come.
Yes.
Up to the very last stanza, he will not come.
Absolutely.
The possibility is still open that he could.
Exactly.
But then he teases you with the idea that something might happen, and this happens in Ulysses as well, another...
Yeah, he's a real brinkmanship man, isn't he?
But
it's on
then
the edge.
It doesn't.
Exactly.
He likes moments of pause.
Exactly. And that might make you want to think about what poetry does. Is it a moment of pause, or is it a moment of action, or is it a moment of meditation,
about reflection?
Or reflection? Exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
So what we've done there is really kind of outline by just looking at that first stanza, we can see how Tennyson is setting up a mode of speaking, writing, and creating a soundscape of stasis, stagnation, and so on, in which then propels on. So hopefully you'll be able to go on then to look at all the other stanzas and to see how those are very carefully controlled too.
And whether they follow on with the kind of themes we picked up here, whether they might subtly alter them in various ways as a poem progresses to the sense which this poem might be said to progress rather than actually continually turning back upon itself.
Absolutely. So this is the kind of thing that this poem has set you up to be aware of in the first stanza. Sound, verbs, are they active or passive, gender, and refrain, this kind of sense of repetition.
And it's using all those to highlight the subject matter of the poem, which is a trapped woman.
Exactly.
So the poem itself is partly doing this to Mariana and is setting itself up as a beautifully crafted aesthetic space within which the subject of the poem cannot escape.
Exactly.
On every rereading, Mariana is still stuck.
She's still stuck, and we still want to read about it. So I think as well there is something kind of disturbing about us as well. What are we doing watching this woman who
reveling in
we
someone's
can't
misery?
Help? Exactly, exactly. So there's lots of questions here then about what constitutes beauty and what constitutes power in a way.
And what the purpose of poetry
is
might be said to be.
Okay, thanks very much.